Why did a team of dogs suddenly turn into the forest away from the path home? The storm came too fast. The K-9 unit was mid-training when it got separated from its handlers. Wind howled, snow covered everything, every trace vanished. They should have been heading back. But Brutus, the pack leader, was moving deeper into the woods. No trainer could understand what was happening. But the instincts of a German shepherd, shaped not only by commands, but by an uncanny connection to humans, led them to a chilling discovery. In a frozen ravine chained to a tree was a man, his body blue with cold, barely breathing. It was Elias Ward, a veteran forest ranger, who had dedicated his life to protecting these woods, now left to die by the very system he once served. And everything, from this moment on, was just the beginning. Are you ready? Granite Hollow sacred, wild, and unforgiving. A forested mountain region where only those who've tasted solitude and braved the bite of wind understand what the night breeze is really saying. In February, the snow turns every peak into a white crown, every tree into a frozen sentinel. Not ideal for K-9 training, but that's what made it the ultimate test. That morning, the sky was clear. Sergeant Lena Graves, commander of the Evergreen K-9 Special Unit, stood in a wide-open clearing, eyes fixed on her military watch. 6 German shepherds stood at attention, their chests rising steadily beneath a dusting of snow. At the front was Brutus, the largest of them all, broad-chested, his coat streaked with old scars and a faded patch on his chest, a wound from his time overseas. His eyes didn't just see, they read people. "Gesture control only," Lena called out. "No voice, no leashes, only hands and eyes." The command was silent. The 6 dogs broke into 2 groups, flowing like a stream through the ravine. Every step seemed preordained, as if a map were etched in their bones. Snow crunched beneath their paws, breath fused with the wind. Lena smiled. This was the moment only seasoned handlers understood. The perfection of silence. But then, the sky changed. At exactly 10:48 a.m., Lena looked up and felt it. The wind had turned. It wasn't a morning breeze. It was a howl-deep long laced with freezing mist. She turned toward the mountain peak. Clouds gathered like iron plates being drawn across the heavens. "A storm?" she murmured. The radio on her hip crackled. Static. Signal distortion. An old, familiar warning of extreme weather shifts. Lena tapped her earpiece. "Echo team, status check. Report by groups." Nothing. She tried again. Only the ragged sound of dying machinery. And then the wind came in full force, not a breeze, but a blizzard lashing her face, cutting her skin like knives. The trees groaned, dry branches clashing like swords. Brutus and the others were no longer in sight. "Brutus! Shadow! Raven!" Lena shouted, voice tearing against the wind. But it wasn't the storm that chilled her blood. It was the silence. No barking, no return prints, no sound at all, as if the entire K-9 unit had been swallowed in a single breath of wind. She sprinted toward the last known position where the teams had split. Her boots sank deep into snow, hand to headset. But all she heard was the mountain wind screaming between the rocks. Just minutes ago, everything had been under control. But Granite Hollow is not like any other place. Here, everything can change in a single breath. Nearly half a mile away, deep within the pine forest, dark shapes moved in silence. 6 German shepherds, led by Brutus, were not panicked. Every step was precise. No commands, no signals, as if they were hearing something no one else could. A faint call from beyond the visible world. Brutus lifted his head into the wind. eyes steady. He paused, sniffed. A sound not natural slipped through the snow, metal clinking, ragged breath, and blood. Without hesitation, he veered off the return path straight into the unknown. The team followed. Not a single one looked back. Lena remained at the rendezvous point for nearly 30 minutes. Each second stretched into tension. The storm had reached level 6. Her eyes burned from snow, her fingers numbed, but her heart pounded not with fear, but with a gut feeling. Brutus wasn't lost. He was going somewhere, with purpose. She pressed her radio again, voice trembling. Echo 1 to base. K9 unit has broken formation. Level 6 storm incoming. I repeat, K9 unit is off grid. No contact from all 6 dogs. Silence. The GPS had gone dark 5 minutes earlier. No one knew where the K9 team was. No one knew that less than 3 kilometers away, a man was chained to a tree as cold as stone. His final breath slipping from frozen lips. The snow had buried all tracks. But it couldn't bury what still called out with a language only those who've stood between life and death could understand. Brutus paused on a ridge, his body a silhouette against the whiteout. Behind him, the other 5 dogs stood still, no barking, no human signals. But in those deep black eyes, a command had been given. A gust slammed into the slope. Snow exploded upward like a curtain pulled over the earth, and in that moment, if someone were watching from above, they'd see something strange. The 6 German shepherds turned away from camp. They marched deeper into the woods, where maps offered no guidance. Brutus led, his nose near the ground, sniffing, ears sharp, eyes flicking with every gust. The wind carried scents pine, frost, and rust. Rust that didn't belong. They should have returned. They should have waited for orders. But something we call instinct, though for dogs trained in war, it's more than that, had pulled Brutus into the unknown. One dog, Blitz, paused, hesitant. Snow caked his back, teeth clenched. But Brutus turned, met his gaze, and Blitz nodded, silently rejoining formation. No one broke ranks. No one hesitated. They all knew they were being led somewhere important. Back near the mountain trail, Lena Graves was still calling their names into the radio, her voice hoarse. No reply. GPS dead. Thermal scanners empty. To headquarters, the K9 team was lost in the storm. But Lena knew Brutus. She had personally overseen his transfer from military service into the K9 unit. She knew how he reacted to the smallest sound. She knew the way his eyes darkened when someone nearby was injured, even before they spoke. And she'd once written a single line in his file, against protocol. Brutus doesn't follow orders. He follows what's right. Brutus now stood beside a fallen tree. The scent of metal grew stronger. So did blood sharp and iron heavy in the frozen air. He licked his lips, then nodded toward Vega. Vega understood instantly. She turned back, carving a pattern in the snow with her claws, a coded message. Investigate, danger, do not follow. The team advanced into a region where the ice buried every path. Snow reached adult knee height, but Brutus pushed through unfazed. Every time he lifted his head, the wind delivered something else. The faint jingle of a chain, the rasp of lungs gasping for air, or simply the feeling of a life waiting to be saved. But Brutus's actions were strange, not just fast reverent. He moved not like a hunter, but like a soldier approaching sacred ground. At one point, Blitz nearly stepped on a hidden branch. It would have cracked loud. Brutus blocked him, made him sit. Not a scolding look, but one that said, "Don't disturb him." And then they found it. Behind a tilted ancient pine, almost invisible in the storm chains. Drag marks, one end buried under snow, but the signs were clear. Someone had fought hard trying to escape. Frozen blood stained the white earth black. Brutus stepped forward, sniffed the air, then froze. His eyes widened, not in shock, but in confirmation. This was what he'd sensed before they even left camp. Behind the tree, half buried in snow, a figure was chained to the trunk. Body limp, breath nearly gone, face bruised and purple. Park ranger uniform in tatters, eyes shut, Elias Ward. And in that moment, time stopped. No wind, no breath. Brutus stepped closer. Nose hovered near blood. A faint groan escaped the man's lips. Brutus raised his head, looked into that battered face. And for the first time since the storm began, he barked. Once, sharp, purposeful. Not in fear, not for help, but to mark a location. There is still life here. In the forest there were no ticking clocks, only wind, and the breath of a man who hadn't given up yet. Brutus moved in close to the snow-laden trunk. The scent of blood, rusted metal, and swollen flesh filled the air. The cold didn't slow him, but each step tightened something in his chest. Not fear, recognition. The victim wasn't lying on the ground. He was chained upright. Iron links wrapped around his torso, binding him to the tree like a crucifixion. His wrists pulled behind him, pinned to the bark. Blood crusted in jagged trails down his sleeves. Head slumped, hair frozen stiff. Face swollen and blue, lips split and bleeding. A powerful gust ripped through the trees, snow exploding into the air, but Brutus didn't flinch. He stepped in, sniffing along the iron chain. Each cold link seemed to carry a memory, a moan, a cry, the slow agony of someone bound too long. He lowered his nose to the man's boot and felt heat, faint, fragile, but still alive. Blitz stepped forward. Brutus growled softly. Not a threat, a command. Stay back. This man, Brutus seemed to say, deserved respect. His name was Elias Ward, age 42, former military firefighter, now chief ranger of Granite Hollow. A quiet man, principled. He lived among the trees like he was born from them. Now he was a trembling husk, tethered to life by something thinner than hope. Then his head twitched, slightly. One blackened eye lifted, blood-crusted, unfocused. Brutus gave a low whine, urging, "Come back." Elias opened his eye wider. A dull film glazed the iris. But then something shifted. Not hope, not belief, recognition. He parted cracked lips. A whisper, more breath than voice, escaped. Brutus heard enough. He barked again, one crisp signal. Immediately Vega and Blitz spread out in a half-circle formation. One pawed at the snow, revealing a metal hook buried beneath layers of ice. The other tilted its head skyward, then let out a chilling, piercing howl, a canine emergency call meant to cut through even the thickest storm. Brutus didn't leave. He sat, in front of Elias, didn't touch him, didn't bark, just stayed. A silent guard, like a soldier beside a fallen comrade, or a friend waiting for last words. Elias gasped, chest stuttering. His lips moved again. This time, with effort, he pushed 2 words past the blood and ice. They know. The voice was a whisper's ghost, but Brutus heard it, and so did the others. Elias lifted his head, eyes searching, not for help, not for comfort, for danger. Brutus understood. He turned toward the forest. A faint snap. Somewhere in the wind, a branch broke. Far, but close enough. Blitz spun, alert. Brutus growled sharp and deep. The formation tightened. They weren't alone. Someone might still be watching or coming back to finish the job. But time was slipping. Elias sagged again, breaths skipping, head drooping. Brutus didn't stay quiet this time. He growled low, then barked 3 times, evenly spaced, maximum alert code. In the distance, a mechanical hum answered, "Snowmobiles." Vega bolted, leaving a visible trail in the snow. Brutus stood, leaned forward. He licked Elias's cheek once, gently, not for comfort, for connection. "Hold on," that touch seemed to say. "We're here." Then he looked to the sky and barked, a sharp, echoing call that shattered the blizzard. On the ridge above, Lena Graves blasted through frozen rock on a snowmobile. Her goggles fogged, her hands numb. But then she saw it, a flash of reflective Green Ranger uniform, and below it, Brutus, standing tall, still, a sentinel between life and death. Lena slammed the brakes, leapt off, rushed through knee-deep snow. Her heart clenched. There, at the base of the tree, Elias Ward, the man who'd taught her how to navigate these forests on her first patrol. Now reduced to a shaking shadow, she dropped to her knees, checked his pulse, faint but present. She looked up, met Brutus's eyes. Neither of them spoke, but in Brutus's stare a message rang louder than any cry. "We found him. Now it's your turn." Sergeant Lena Graves stood frozen. She had never seen eyes like that, clear, urgent, and filled with a strange kind of faith that humans often lose when staring death in the face. Brutus didn't whimper, didn't bark. He just stayed still, silent. But his eyes never left Elias, the man chained to the tree, skin purple, lips cracked, breath as fragile as mist in a forest clutched by cold. Lena lunged forward, knees sinking into the snow. Her trembling hand reached for Elias's neck, faint pulse, but still there. She pulled off her glove, checked his pupils, still reactive, chest rising barely, but rising. A miracle. No, a miracle with method, one that only this breed of dog could deliver. 3 other K9s formed a protective ring. One sniffed steadily around the perimeter. One stayed tight at Lena's side, ready to growl at the slightest sound. And Brutus, he didn't move an inch from Elias. Lena didn't know how they'd found him, in a blinding white granite hollow, with no coordinates, no distress signal, not even a blood trail. But she knew this. 10 minutes later, and he would have been a corpse, and a mystery no one could ever solve. She drew her survival knife, began sawing through the chain links that pinned Elias to the trunk. Every touch made his body flinch, pain reflexes firing from the depths of his spine. Brutus let out a low growl, not angry, but urging. "Hurry!" "I know," Lena whispered. "I'm trying. He's been through enough." Finally, the last chain snapped. Elias collapsed. But before he hit the ground, Brutus moved, slipping his shoulder under the man's torso. A perfect catch. Right place, right force, like he'd done it 100 times before. Lena stared at the sight, and her chest tightened. There was something deeply human in that gesture. Not because Brutus could calculate, but because he could care. In a way that was purer, more instinctive than anyone Lena had ever met in uniform. She triggered the beacon. Nearest rescue post, a few miles out. But the wind was sharpening its claws. There was no time to wait. "Brutus, I need your help," she said. Not sure if he understood. But Brutus turned. No bark, no growl. He walked from Lena to Elias, then back again. Back and forth, as if drawing a path, a plan, a rhythm. Lena understood. She wrapped Elias in a thermal cloak, secured him with a folded topographic map as a brace around his chest and neck to prevent spasms. Brutus gently took the edge of the drag line in his teeth and started moving. Slow, steady, on rhythm. The canine unit spread into a reverse V formation, cutting the way forward, shielding 2 fragile lives behind them. A man pulled back from the edge of hell, and a dog now carrying the burden of salvation. The snow still fell, the wind still howled, but Lena knew. From that moment on, they weren't alone in the forest. Because sometimes it's not man who saves the beast, it's the beast who reminds man of the best parts of himself. The storm still howled like the forest itself was breathing heavy, ragged breaths. As Lena knelt to check Elias's pulse, Brutus was already moving. No command, no signal from any handler. Everything unfolded as if it had been trained into the marrow of his bones. Brutus turned his head, and in the glint of his deep brown eyes was a silent command. Blitz understood instantly. He sprinted up a nearby ridge, stood tall, ears upright, eyes scanning every direction. Vega dropped back and began digging into the snow near the area where the chains had been. Each paw strike was clean, strong, precise, as if she already knew where the lock was hidden. Meanwhile, Raven, a lean, fast-footed dog, started barking in rhythm. 3 short barks, then pause, then 3 again. Encoded SOS, the canine emergency pattern. Lena stepped back, frozen for a moment by what she was witnessing. She'd seen canine units perform under fire, chase down suspects, search through ruins. But this had no orders, no leashes, no human voice directing them, only Brutus, and a team moving on instinct and something deeper, the will to survive together. A strong gust rocked the trees, snow crashing down onto Elias's shoulders, covering his face. Lena dove in, brushing the snow away. Her fingers touched his cheek so cold it barely felt like skin. But Elias was breathing, faint as mist, but still alive. Brutus moved in close. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply licked a smear of blood from Elias's temple, then glanced toward another dog, giving a subtle cue. And somehow, though they were dogs, not a single one stepped on Elias. No chaos, no panic. They moved as if they knew this space was sacred, that this man teetering between life and death needed reverence. "What are you guys doing?" Lena murmured behind her scarf. A click rang out. Vega had found it. The lock. Half buried beneath frozen earth and ice, the rusted shackle emerged, proof of the agony Elias had endured for hours on end. Brutus nudged the loosened chain with his snout, Not enough force to break it, but enough to say, "Here, this is the key." Lena dropped to her knees, yanked the bolt cutters from her medical kit, wedged them into the frozen lock. But her hands were stiff, fingers drained of blood. She clenched her jaw, pressed down. But rust and ice resisted. The latch refused to give. Then Brutus stepped in. A gentle shoulder shove, just firm enough, shifted the mechanism by a hair. Snap! The lock popped. Lena exhaled sharply. "Good boy, Brutus. Damn good boy." She began unwinding the chain, unwrapping Elias's bloodied wrists, the skin raw and pale, turning a bluish gray. Elias groaned softly, a reflex buried deep in the body's survival code. But he was still alive. Up on the ridge, Blitz growled low. A noise stirred in the woods. Unfamiliar, not an animal, not the wind. Brutus turned his head, only a second. Then he looked back at Elias, breathing shallow, barely holding on, and in Brutus's eyes, not fear, not suspicion, but a plea. Save him. There was no whistle, no voice, no command stick, but what Brutus and the others were doing now was beyond training. It was responsibility. It was loyalty. Lena activated the emergency beacon, voice shaking. "Echo 1 to base. We've found Ranger Elias Ward critical condition. Sending coordinates now via Brutus's collar tracker. Request immediate med-sled dispatch." She paused, breath catching, then added, "And send a forensics team. This wasn't an accident. He was left here to die." Brutus backed off slightly. Elias's body began trembling early spasms from blood returning too fast to frozen tissue. Lena pulled out a thermal blanket, pressed it over his chest, gently rubbing both temples to stimulate circulation. And Brutus, he simply stood there, not barking, not pacing, watching Elias with a look Lena had only seen in war veterans, like he'd been in that place himself once. And in that hush, Lena turned to him and thought, "We can teach dogs many things, but we can't teach them how to care. That has to be born with them." A gust rose again, far off, faint but distinct, the sound of an approaching snow engine. Hope, faint but real. But Brutus didn't flinch. He would not move, not until Elias Ward was safe. The rescue team arrived just as Elias was placed on the stretcher, wrapped in thermal layers, heat packs pressed against his chest and thighs, but his skin still held that frightening bluish hue. Throughout the entire operation, Brutus walked step for step beside the stretcher. No one told him to. No one dared stop him. As the sled began to roll back toward the base camp, Lena climbed in beside Elias. Her gloved hand gripped his wrist. Even through the thick insulation, she could feel how fragile he was. Brutus lay on the floor of the rescue vehicle, his head resting gently against the stretcher rail. Then, Elias's eyelids twitched, opened slightly, foggy, disoriented, but his gaze landed on Brutus, and in that moment he knew. He hadn't been left behind. The first sound Elias registered wasn't a voice, it was breathing, slow, heavy, steady, like the rhythm of wind rolling through a canyon. He didn't know where he was. He couldn't remember what had happened. But that sound meant he wasn't alone. Slowly, Elias opened his eyes wider. The sterile light from the ceiling pierced his pupils, making him squint. His throat burned. His chest ached like it had been crushed beneath a snowcat. A needle pulsed in his left arm, and an IV line stretched taut with every twitch. He was alive. He drew in a breath and gasped from the sharp pain slicing down his spine. He turned his head. Brutus. The dog lay curled at the side of the bed, head resting lightly against the mattress, eyes closed, but ears standing tall, alert. Among all the wires, monitors, antiseptic smells, and the endless beep of the heart rate machine, only Brutus felt real. Only Brutus reminded Elias that he was still human. He tried moving a finger. Pain radiated instantly from wrist to shoulder. But Brutus stirred, eyes open, watching, not with the curiosity of an animal, but with recognition. "You're awake." Brutus stood, didn't bark, didn't jump up to lick Elias's face like a normal dog. He simply stepped forward, one pace, and stood still at the bedside, like a soldier, standing by his commander's side after surviving the battlefield. Elias forced himself to swallow. His voice gravelly, scraped raw. "Is it you?" Brutus tilted his head slightly, eyes fixed on Elias, not questioning, waiting for a word, a nod, a sign that the man he had saved had truly returned. Lena walked in just then. She smiled, soft as spring wind. "Hey, Ward. Still know how to scare the hell out of people, huh?" Elias cracked a weak, crooked smile, dry, but real. "How long?" he asked. "Almost 2 days," Lena replied. "You had severe hypothermia, circulation failure, soft tissue swelling, and a deep gash on your temple. Lucky Brutus found you in time." She stepped closer, sat beside the bed. Her hand touched his forearm like touching memory. "We didn't find human footprints, no drag marks, no cries for help, just 6 dogs. And Brutus was the first to stop, and the last one to leave." Elias turned to Brutus. "He didn't leave me?" Lena shook her head. "Not once. Not from the moment we found you to the moment you got in the ambulance. Not during wound sterilization. Not even overnight." Her voice softened. More than professional, more than respectful. "Brutus chose you." Since Brutus joined the Evergreen Canine Unit, he had been a challenge. A former military working dog, he had lost his handler in an explosion overseas. The trauma had shattered his trust. He obeyed no one, resisted orders. Other trainers called him stubborn, untrainable, even recommended removing him from service. Only Lena never gave up on him. But even for her, Brutus had never bonded. Until now. Elias raised a trembling hand. At first it shook, unsure. But as his fingers brushed through Brutus's thick fur, the dog closed his eyes. Not from fatigue, but from something deeper. He had waited for this touch, for 2 days and nights. Elias whispered, "Thank you, battle brother." A word that might seem distant, strange, when spoken to a dog, but in Brutus's eyes, glistening and still, he understood. Lena quietly rose, stepped back from the room. The door eased shut behind her. And there they remained. 2 survivors. One man who had returned from the edge of death. One dog who had no words. But a bond stronger than language. No dramatics. No rush. Just a silent vow. "I'm here. I won't leave. And I'll never let them take you again." In the dim hospital room, under the soft flicker of fluorescent light, there were no radio voices, no nurses bustling by. Only the steady beeping of the heart monitor, a gentle reminder that life still pulsed, frail but defiant. Brutus lay close to the bed, chest rising and falling with quiet breaths. His thick fur still held specks of snow, a stubborn remnant of the blizzard. His eyes were half-closed, watchful, weary, but unmoving from the man in the bed. Elias Ward, former forest ranger, a man who had once faced down wildfires, storms, and isolation, a man betrayed by his own system, left chained like a discarded tool to die. No one came. Not colleagues, not old friends. Only the dogs. No, only this dog. Elias looked at Brutus, and the look in his eyes changed. No longer confused, not unfamiliar. Recognition, like a memory snapping into place. You found me. Brutus tilted his head, a faint wag of the tail. Not for reward, not for routine, just agreement. And in that moment, Elias felt something new beat inside his chest, not from the machines, but from trust. They didn't know what would come next. Investigations, threats, old ghosts returning in new disguises, but right now, two souls who had clawed their way back from the nightmare had found one another, and that was enough. Outside, the snow still fell, but inside that room, for the first time in years, Elias didn't feel cold. Dawn in Granite Hollow wasn't like anywhere else. Sunlight didn't pierce through the forest. It fractured into pale golden shards that scattered over the snow like memories never told. Elias opened his eyes. His body was warmer now, after hours of fluids and thermal blankets, but the cold remained inside. In places no blood ever reached. He didn't ask questions, didn't need answers. The only thing he did was sit up slowly, every joint screaming, and stare out the window. The pine trees were still, silent, alert. Brutus sat by the door, eyes fixed on him since the moment he stirred, unblinking. Elias turned, nodding softly, like greeting an old friend, though they'd known each other for less than 2 days. Brutus crept closer, then sat at the foot of the bed. He wasn't intrusive. But his presence had weight, like he wasn't just a dog, but some fragment of a memory not yet unlocked. Elias touched his temple bandaged but pulsing. Beneath the gauze was a deep gash, and deeper still, echoes, voices, sharp, fragmented, unforgettable. If you don't sign, you'll disappear in this snow like the rest. No one's coming for you. No one. This ranger's too stubborn. Make him an example. His throat burned dry. He closed his eyes, trying to stitch the sounds back together. The voices were steady. No panic, no accents. Not locals, not amateurs. Military or ex-military. He inhaled, but pain in his ribs broke the breath short. One side still cracked. He didn't care. Physical pain he could manage. What he needed was memory. Brutus seemed to feel it. He stepped closer, muzzle brushing the edge of the blanket. No growl, no sound, but in his eyes, empathy. Elias stared long and hard. A vision returned. Brutus, in the snowstorm, silent, guarding a dying man. No training teaches that. No manual instructs a dog to stay by the side of death, just so no one has to die alone. Moments later, the door opened. Lena entered, carrying a steaming cup of coffee. "You should be lying down." "Can't," Elias murmured. "I remember their voices." She paused, setting the cup on the table. Her eyes sharpened. "Anything specific?" Elias nodded slowly. "Not locals. They spoke too clearly. No slang, no panic. They were trained, organized." Lena sat, face darkening. "Any idea who they are?" Elias looked at her, his gaze dimmed by frost and sleepless nights. "I don't think this is a regular logging crew. Someone knew my route, knew I'd be alone, knew exactly where radio coverage fails. That's not coincidence." Brutus let out a low growl, not loud, but long. The kind of sound that came when the air itself shifted. Something had been said, and couldn't be unsaid. Lena flipped through her notebook, scanned patrol assignments, then stopped. One document, a patrol order signed and stamped February 3rd by Conservation Command. It had the seal. It had the signature. But it made her blood run cold. Elias never received this patrol order. "What the hell?" she whispered, handing the paper to him. He frowned. "This signature, it's not mine." Brutus growled louder now. Elias nodded, as if confirming something Brutus already knew. "Someone inside sent me into that death zone." Silence thickened the room. Then Elias looked up, voice steady. "I didn't die, and I won't be quiet." Brutus stepped closer. Not suspicion in his eyes now, but allegiance. That night, the Granite Hollow Ranger Station was quiet. But not the kind of quiet forests bring. This was a silence with a scent. The scent of something coming. Elias moved slowly down the wooden hallway, his legs still wrapped in gauze, every step a shallow breath. Brutus shadowed him, ear tips twitching, tense, on edge. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. Since Elias woke and spoke, the station had changed. Tech glitches began. Security cameras lost feed, 2 perimeter lights flickered, even though engineers claimed the wiring was fine. Then, just after dusk, Lena burst into the control room, holding fresh thermal prints. "Elias, you need to see this." 3 images. First, tire tracks, clean in untrodden snow. Second, a severed chain, draped over a pine branch like it had been flung away in haste. Third, a blurry shadow near the southern tech shed. Timestamp, 2:13 a.m. Elias's fingers trembled as he touched the photo. "They've come back." Lena nodded. She didn't ask who they were. Brutus growled, not loud but drawn out. A sound Lena had never heard before. Not fear, not alarm, but something uncertain, like a predator catching a familiar scent, and not yet knowing if it was prey or threat. Elias stepped to the window. The snow had stopped. The sky was unnervingly clear. Moonlight turned the forest silver. In the distance, a light blinked at the tree line. Not patrol lights, not beacons. A wandering beam, watching. "They're testing us," Elias whispered. "Not attacking, just observing." Lena gripped her coffee cup. "We need investigators, an outside task force." "No," Elias shook his head. "Not yet. If we escalate without evidence, someone higher up will bury this. I need proof, something they can't erase." Brutus jumped up to the window, nose pressed to the glass. Then he turned, bolted for the main door. No bark. But something had caught his attention. Elias followed immediately. No questions, no hesitation. Outside, the snow crunched underfoot. The air steamed from contact with their boots. Brutus veered behind the station to the ATV shed, nose to the ground, circling the maintenance wall. Elias stopped cold. A footprint. Small, but deep, fresh. He knelt, brushed away the frost. Military-grade boot, not ranger issue, not K9. He stood up, face hardening. "Someone got this close!" Brutus turned, growled again, eyes locked on the perimeter fence. Suddenly, the northern alarm lights blinked. No sirens, just flashing red, muted like someone tampered with it. Lena ran up, breath tight. "North fence alarm, blinked and went dark. Did you see anything?" Elias didn't answer. His eyes locked on the empty space between two trees, where a shadow had just vanished. Brutus stepped forward, growling low, not barking, not jumping. Someone had come close and vanished. Lena checked the security logs. Camera blackout, 3 minutes, 12 seconds, exactly that window. Elias shut his eyes, then opened them, ice cold. This wasn't a threat. It was a reminder. "A reminder of what?" Lena asked. "That they don't need to kill me. They just need me to be afraid." Brutus turned his gaze back to the woods, and for a brief moment, Elias looked with him. No words were needed, but his heart knew. They were still out there, watching, waiting. The night air carried something not of the forest. Lurking beneath pine and sap, it slid between the timber walls like an uninvited guest. Iron, engine oil, and human sweat. The scent of a predator. Elias didn't sleep. He sat at his old desk, half-finished reports under a dim lamp. A pencil stabbed into the paper. Every gust over the rooftop made him lift his head, not out of fear, but readiness. Brutus lay beneath the window, eyes wide, motionless. Since discovering the strange boot print, he hadn't left Elias's side. No leash, no commands, just duty. Lena entered from the hallway, pistol in hand, eyes red but grip steady. "Rear tech cameras down again, they're probing us." Elias didn't look at her. "They're mapping our response." 2:14 a.m. A faint click echoed behind the station. Only Brutus heard it. He sprang up, coiled, silent. Elias followed, rifle in hand. Lena cut the station's main power. Lights died instantly. Darkness fell, like someone squeezed the air from the entire building. Only moonlight now, slashing across the wooden floor like a silver knife. Brutus moved like smoke. Elias mirrored his steps. They approached the gear shed where a back door was often left unlocked during rushed shifts. Footsteps, snow crunching, a figure. Elias raised his hand. Lena circled wide, blocking the south escape. Brutus stopped at the door, nose to the floor. Eyes darted. 2 intruders. 1 rummaging. 1 standing guard. Elias counted to 3. Kicked the door in. Brutus launched first. A flash of fur and force. 1 man screamed, too slow. Brutus pinned him, jaws clamped on his knife-hand wrist. The second bolted, ran right into Lena's knee, folding like dead timber. 30 seconds, both down. Elias dropped a knee onto the pinned man's back, searched his pockets. Radio, multi-lock tool set, and a key card not Ranger issued. "Military?" Lena panted. Elias didn't answer, but his eyes went colder than the frost outside. Brutus still held the man's wrist, tight enough to immobilize, loose enough not to sever. Elias crouched, voice low. "Who are you? Who sent you?" The man chuckled, blood trickling from his lip. "You think you're safe now? All it takes is 1 signal, and this whole place vanishes." Lena clenched her fist. "What the hell are you talking about?" He didn't respond, just looked at Elias, calm, too calm. "I'm not the only one." 3 seconds of silence, then a smile hollow, empty. I'm just the first knock on the door. Then, beep. A device on his belt blinked. Elias lunged too late. The signal was gone. No trace. No data. Only the threat. Brutus released him on cue but stood guard, chest between Elias and the door eyes never blinking. A low growl, not of violence, but warning. Elias lowered his rifle, but his gaze was sharp steel. The intruder lay cuffed, bleeding, not scared of being caught, but of those still outside. Lena looked at Elias. His eyes weren't blurred like that first day. Now, they were cut from winter. "They're sending a message," he said. And tonight was only the beginning. Lena turned to the monitors flickering. Snow-white static. Then a shadow. A man. Standing. Watching. Still. Unmoving. A statue carved from moonlight. "He wasn't with these two," Lena whispered. "He just stood there, watching from the tree line. They're gauging us." Brutus growled again. The intruder flinched. Elias knelt, grabbed the man by the collar. "Who sent you?" I don't know his real name. Just Nighthawk. I take orders. I don't ask. I thought the station was abandoned. You thought wrong," Elias snapped, releasing him like dropping filth. "And now you'll send a message back. This station is not alone." Brutus circled the bound man, paw steps etching defiance into the snowy floor. Lena checked her mag, asked quietly, "Should we call for backup?" Elias didn't look away from the screen, where the figure had vanished like mist. "No, not yet. If we escalate, we trigger a war. Tonight was a warning. If we respond wrong, tomorrow will be the attack." He glanced at Brutus, still alert, still watching the forest. Like he could hear things no one else could. Chains. Steps. The scent of betrayal. Lena placed a hand on Elias's shoulder, voice softer now. "We won't leave you alone again. No more nights like that one." Elias nodded, then looked at Brutus. "I don't think I would have made it, if it weren't for him." Brutus glanced up, wagged his tail once, and for the first time since the attack, for one brief stolen moment, the darkness didn't feel unbeatable. It felt like a challenge, a silent declaration. And they were ready. Outside, the wind blew. But now, each gust past the sealed windows wasn't just wind. It was the forest whispering back, "We see you too." The morning sun over Granite Hollow was deceiving. The sky was blue, calm, as if the break-in, the whispers in the dark, and the near-death standoff the night before had never happened. But inside the ranger station, Elias Ward hadn't forgotten. He sat at his old desk, flipping through documents with steady hands and eyes that missed nothing. Patrol assignments he'd once approved, equipment logs, trail collapse reports. All of it was familiar. Too familiar. Unsettlingly so. Brutus lay curled at Elias's feet, head resting against his leg. He breathed slow and steady, but his eyes never closed. Last night still shimmered behind his amber stare, constantly flicking toward the window, ready to react to the slightest shift of shadow. Elias stopped at a thin yellow slip patrol confirmation, northern perimeter dated February 3rd. He froze. It bore his name, his signature. The handwriting was nearly perfect, close enough to fool any administrative eye. But it couldn't fool him. He pulled out a reference sample of his own signature and signed 3 times across the wood grain of the desk. Same tilt. Heavy pressure on the W, on the yellow slip too symmetrical. And the W had no hook. Forged. His chest tightened. He grabbed the paper and strode out of the room, calling loudly, "Lena!" She entered the main office just as he held out the document. "Take a look. Patrol confirmation for the night I was attacked." She studied it, brows tightening. "Looks legit." "It's not," Elias said, voice low. Brutus growled quietly, reacting instantly to his tone. Lena turned it over. "Stamped by Central Wilderness Operations, authorization code G45L09. She turned to her computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. 3 minutes passed. The screen flashed. "Document code G45L09 does not exist in internal archive. Not deleted, not revoked, never issued. Someone accessed the system and fabricated a phantom document," Elias murmured. Lena looked up. Her eyes were sharp now, like pulled wire. "There are only 4 people at Granite Hollow with admin-level clearance to create that type of record. You, me, Chief Beckett, and someone higher up." Elias narrowed his eyes. "Who higher up?" Lena hesitated. "Regional Deputy Director Lucille Vance." The name fell like an arrow into the room, silent, cold, and sharp. Brutus rose, quietly stepping toward the window. Not coincidence. "Lucille worked with Beckett," Elias said. 3 years ago, they co-signed the Core Zone Eco-Tourism Expansion Plan, suspended due to missing environmental assessments. Lena nodded. "I remember. That project. Vanished." Elias' voice hardened. "Not vanished. Buried." Brutus barked once quiet, but alert toward the road. A truck had pulled up. Federal Ranger plates. A man stepped out, uniformed, holding a sealed envelope. Elias met him at the steps. No introductions, just a clipped line. "Internal documents, delivered per Central Office request." Lena opened the packet. Inside, a new stack of files. Supplemental reports from an internal investigation. First page, authorization of Independent Northern Patrol requested by Elias Ward, signed February 2nd. Another record, another signature. Same name, same ink, same format. Still not his. Elias clenched the packet, his voice like a blade drawn through snow. "We're fighting a monster. With a desk job." Lena didn't smile. She just said quietly, "And that monster knows how to make lies look official." Brutus growled faintly, gaze fixed toward the edge of the woods, where the truth and those trying to bury it had never left. Elias stood before Chief Beckett's office, a weathered wooden door, worn smooth around the lock. Once, it symbolized trust between 2 men. Now, when Elias gripped the handle, he felt rot beneath the polish. Brutus stood beside him. No barking, no tension, but his eyes were sharp. He could feel Elias's pulse falter. Something had broken inside the man beside him. Elias opened the door. Beckett looked up, glasses low on his nose. "Elias," he said, forcing a smile. "Heard about last night. You all right?" Elias didn't answer. He stepped forward and laid the forged documents on the desk. Beckett glanced down. His fingers clenched slightly, then relaxed. "Where'd you get this?" "From the internal system, with my name, my signature, this station seal." Elias paused, locking eyes with him. "I didn't sign any of it." Silence. Beckett removed his glasses and set them down slowly. In seconds, his face aged a decade. Not from guilt, from knowing the game was ending. "You know, Elias," he said quietly, "this system wasn't built to protect the forest. It was built to sell it, 1 acre at a time, as long as no one made noise." Elias didn't blink. Who are you working with? Lucille, Beckett exhaled. And others. Higher up. I just kept the doors looking clean. Brutus growled softly. Elias dropped a hand to his back, not for the dog, to keep himself calm. I trusted you, Elias whispered. When I was a rookie, you taught me to track bears, to spot tree rot, to love every inch of this land, and now you led me to die. Beckett clenched his jaw. I didn't know they'd tie you up. I thought it was just to scare you, get you to resign. I didn't think they'd leave me to freeze. Elias cut in. They did. And you let them. The silence that followed was colder than the frost outside. Beckett chuckled dryly. You think anything changes if I say no? You think one man can stop the machine that's been swallowing this forest? Elias spoke with steel behind every syllable. I'm not alone. Brutus stepped forward, blocking the space between them, not aggressive, but decisive. We're taking this to federal investigators, Elias said. You'll be first on the list, not because I hate you, but because you used to be good, and good men shouldn't help evil win. Beckett stared at him. Not angry, just tired. I'm done fighting, he said. Do what you have to, but be careful, Elias. Lucille, she's not the end. Elias turned without replying. Brutus followed, silent as a memory that won't wash clean. Behind them, Beckett pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen, then called a familiar number. There's a problem, he said. The kid won't stay quiet, and that dog, it remembers. Pause. Then his final line, voice flat as a burial bell. If you're gonna shut this down, do it fast, before the whole station learns the truth. Snow began to fall again. A thin layer, soft as ash, settling over a memory not yet laid to rest. Elias stood at the northern overlook, a place once used by fire patrols. Now it was barren. Cold. The wind screamed through the trees like forgotten warnings. Beckett arrived alone. Heavy coat, shoulders trembling. No guards. No weapons. But Elias stayed sharp. Because Beckett didn't need weapons. His words had almost killed him once. Brutus stood off to the side. Snow matted across his back. He didn't shiver. He was waiting. Elias, Beckett said, his voice catching in the wind. Why did you call me here? Elias didn't answer. He tossed a file toward him. Beckett caught it, opened it. Inside copies of every forged document. Land sale transactions via shell companies tied to his son. We've already sent it to federal oversight, Elias said, voice flat. Arrest warrant's been approved. We just need your confirmation. Beckett stared at the pages as if they'd hollowed him out. His face reddened cold or shame, it was hard to say. You don't understand, he murmured. This machine, it's bigger than us. I tried to protect this place once. Then I realized survival means compromise. Elias clenched his fist. And your compromise was letting me die in the snow? Beckett looked up. For the first time he saw Elias not as a subordinate, but as a man who might bring him down. I was scared, Elias, of the people behind it. They're not just corporations. They've got money, guns, and laws. Elias stepped forward, calm as frozen water. And I've got Brutus. The dog growled softly. Beckett looked over right as Brutus locked eyes with him. Not anger, just judgment, the kind born from instinct. A voice crackled in Elias's earpiece. Echo 1, warrant confirmed, awaiting position. Elias never looked away. standing in front of me," he said quietly. Beckett dropped the file into the snow. "You can arrest me, but don't think it ends here." Elias stepped up, snapped the cuffs into place. Beckett didn't resist. As the steel tightened, he whispered, "The one you should fear is the hand you've already shaken." Brutus growled again. Not for Beckett, but because somewhere in the trees the wind had shifted, footsteps slipping away. Elias tightened the cuffs. He knew Beckett wasn't bluffing, and Brutus knew. Someone else was still watching. Beckett was led away in silence. No cries, no confession, only footprints in the snow, and wind carrying a ruthless reminder, this isn't over. Brutus looked up, eyes amber like fire beneath frost. He didn't watch Beckett. He stared deep into the forest, and for a fleeting moment, Elias stared with him. And between them, unspoken but clear, danger hadn't vanished. It had simply changed its shape. The skies over Granite Hollow had turned a dense, leaden gray, not the color of a coming storm, but of something creeping closer. Silent, formless, yet powerful enough to send every nerve in Brutus's body snapping taut like a tripwire. The ranger station was unnaturally quiet. Elias sat in the surveillance room, the glow of the security monitors casting a strained light across his face. Lena stood beside him, gripping a cold cup of coffee she'd forgotten to drink 2 hours ago. "There," Elias whispered. He rewound footage from camera 4 mounted high on a pine pole near the old water pump station. The screen flickered into a hazy black-and-white image of the forest at night, with infrared reaching only partway into the gloom. In the frame far back, a figure appeared. It didn't move closer, didn't approach the station, just stood there, far enough to avoid motion detection, too close to be coincidence. Elias zoomed in. The image pixelated but not beyond recognition. A tactical jacket, low-brimmed cap, and something long in hand, maybe binoculars, maybe a device. "That's not standard ranger gear," Lena muttered. "Not military issue either," Elias replied, "but matches temperate forest camouflage. That kind of training isn't common." Brutus suddenly growled low. He rose from the corner, moving to the door, head low, nose twitching, paws soundless on the floor. Elias stood abruptly. "There's something out there." Brutus didn't bark. He didn't need to. The air itself had shifted, bringing with it the scent of metal, of freshly oiled weapons, of human sweat masked beneath synthetic cloth, things that didn't belong in Granite Hollow. He moved along the tree line, a shadow sliding over snow. Elias followed behind, shotgun in hand, eyes fixed in the direction Brutus tracked. There were no footprints. Last night's snow had wiped everything clean, but the scent remained, and Brutus never forgot. Then he stopped, lifted his head, and let out a short, sharp growl, not a warning, but confirmation. Elias froze. He raised a hand, motioning for Lena to flank left, cut off the retreat path. Brutus's gaze locked onto a dense patch of underbrush beneath it, a shallow indentation in the snow. Someone had just been there and had slipped away. "Camera 4 was placed perfectly," Lena said, once they'd returned to the station. "He knew its field of view, its blind spots, didn't leave tracks, didn't let Brutus catch scent until it was too late. This guy was trained to beat K9 units." Elias nodded, silent. He pulled the video back up, pausing at a single moment. The man had turned slightly, just enough for the camera to catch a side angle, His face was hidden by a dark scarf, but on his left shoulder, a patch, a strange insignia, military style, but belonging to no known U.S. unit. Brutus growled again. Elias rested a hand on his head. "You feel it too, don't you, buddy?" Brutus didn't respond, just stared back, his amber eyes gleaming with something ancient, cold, the sense of a hunter nearby. Hours later, as dusk fell, Elias received an encrypted message from Central Command. Visual analysis, insignia possibly linked to a private military group formerly active in the Middle East outside federal jurisdiction. A non-governmental entity, armed, operating beyond oversight. Elias whispered, "Solace, is that you?" "What'd you say?" Lena turned. He didn't answer. His hand gripped the desk. Brutus stood not facing the forest this time, but staring straight into the surveillance feed, directly at camera 4, as if sensing someone was watching from the other side. Wind picked up. The window panes trembled. Elias lowered the blinds but left a gap. He knew the rules of this game no longer belonged to forest law, or even human law. Night fell over Granite Hollow like a spill of tar-wet, cold and heavy with dread. The ranger station glowed faintly, its only light coming from the main room where Elias and Brutus sat, not working, just awake. Lena had returned to the southern outpost to file reports. The station was theirs tonight. No one said it aloud, but both understood tonight wasn't like the others. Near midnight. The wind outside went still. Elias had dozed off in a wooden chair, head resting on the desk, hand near a loaded Glock. Brutus lay nearby, half awake. Then, clink, a faint sound, thin, metallic, like two chains brushing against each other. Elias sat bolt upright, not because it was loud, but because he'd heard it once before. The night he was left to die in the woods. The sound of chains dragging across snow. He grabbed his gun and moved. Brutus followed, silent and alert. No lights, no shouting, just breath misting in the cold and the whisper of pine needles above. At the western tree line, the densest thicket of evergreens. Brutus halted. The fur on his neck bristled. Elias stopped beside him. They saw no one, but in the snow, clear as a scar, parallel drag marks, as if a cylindrical object had been pulled, and faint indents, chain links. Elias crouched, touched the snow. Cold, fresh. "Someone was just here," he whispered. Brutus whined softly, turning his head back toward Elias. "Should we track?" Elias shook his head. "Not yet, buddy. We don't know how many he's got with him." Back at the station, Elias checked the camera logs again. This time, the feed had glitched exactly from 11:39 to 11:53. The same window when he'd heard the chain. Someone had temporarily jammed the signal, not deleted footage, just masked it, not amateur work, and not your average land thief. Elias sat, cracking his knuckles, face expressionless. But in his mind, an old door creaked open. The iron stake, the frozen chain, the metallic taste of blood, and the laughter, that dry, hollow laugh echoing in the forest. Not cruel, not joyful, just indifferent. The laugh of men trained not to flinch at another man's pain. Brutus approached, resting his head on Elias's knee. Elias laid a trembling hand on his head. "There's something familiar about this, Brutus," he whispered. Not just the chain. The way he moved, how he jammed the signal, how he left a clue, just enough for me to see. Brutus closed his eyes, but his breath was fast. Elias looked toward the window. This guy was military, not infantry, special ops like you, like me, before Granite Hollow. He walked to the metal cabinet, unlocked it, pulled out an old file classified notes from the Special Operations Unit he'd once served in, long before becoming a ranger. The unit had been disbanded after an unsanctioned foreign op. He flipped to the final page. Personnel list. Last name redacted. No name. Just skill set, wilderness survival, silent combat, K9 countermeasures, removed from system 2017. Elias clutched the file, heart pounding. Brutus growled, not at assent, but at pressure. Someone was sending a message. No words, no contact. Just a rusted metal chain link dangling from a hook outside the ranger station the next morning. No footprints, no drag marks. Only a silent calling card from a nightmare that never truly ended. That morning, the fog clung like smoke to every pine needle, every rock. The ranger station looked drowned in silence, the air thick since the chain had appeared. Elias stepped outside, eyes scanning the woods. Brutus walked beside him, quiet as breath. No need to speak. They both knew the threat had gone underground. Lena returned by noon. In her hand, an internal document pulled from County PD servers. "You're going to want to see this," she said gravely. Inside the file, a face, unmistakable, Mark Howie, young deputy sheriff from Garnett County, clean cut, unremarkable, except the eyes, sharp, calculated. Elias had seen that look before, in elite teams, in mercenaries, in ghosts. Elias clenched the folder. "We had him right next to us." Lena nodded. "Joined the force 5 years ago. Perfect record. Before that, nothing. No public military history, no civilian trace. It's like he appeared out of thin air." Elias hissed, "Not thin air, from a place without ID numbers." That night, they set a trap. Brutus stayed at the station. Elias and Lena drove to an abandoned logistics post in the woods where the signal had been jammed. Inside the old fireplace, a camouflaged shortwave transmitter, battery still warm. Whoever used it had left within the hour. On the wall, charcoal scrawl, "You're still breathing, so I'm still playing fair." Elias's lip twitched. That tone, that chill. He'd heard it before in Black Ops briefings and Shadow Wars. Lena pulled out her phone. "Call Howie. Say we need him here to inspect the site." Elias nodded. "Let's see how long he can keep pretending." 30 minutes later, Howie's SUV pulled up. He stepped out in uniform, brushing dust from his jacket. He looked more like he was on a stroll than investigating a murder-adjacent site. "What's so urgent, Graves?" he asked Lena, then smirked at Elias. "You're back on your feet fast." Elias didn't answer. He tossed him a printout still from the camera footage, a figure in camo on the edge of the station grounds. Howie looked, smiled. "Looks like me, huh?" "We're not joking," Lena snapped. Howie strolled into the old cabin, turning his back. "Then don't joke." From his jacket, he pulled a weathered folder, placed it on the rotting table. "You want answers? Here's the network. I wrote it. I trained Beckett's people. I coordinated every land acquisition in these woods." Elias froze. Howie turned, eyes sharp as razors. "I'm the architect. You're just bricks in the way." From the SUV, Brutus launched. No command needed. He knew this one was real. Howie reached for his holster, but Elias had already closed the distance. Glock pressed to Howie's temple. No one moved. Only Brutus's breathing heavy, fast drumming like a war rhythm. Howie chuckled. "Shoot, Walker. But if you do, you'll never find solace. Never know who's really buying this forest. I'm just the map. He's the terrain." Elias tightened the trigger, but didn't fire. Lena cuffed him. Brutus stood guard, growling. On Howie's wrist, exposed as the sleeve rode up, a tattoo, 3 intersecting lines like a battle axe, the mark of an international mercenary group. Elias stepped back. "You're no soldier. You're a monster raised in shadow." Howie bled from his lip but smiled. "I'm the future of resource warfare, Elias. And you? You're a relic they forgot to bury." As he was led away, Elias gripped his weapon tighter. Brutus licked his hand gently. A reminder. This moment was real. Behind the cabin, police lights flickered. But Elias didn't look. He stared into the woods, where the clinking chains of memory had been replaced by something far more dangerous. A system that knew how to make its own rules, and how to break them. Snow had begun to fall again over the eastern slope of Granite Hollow, thin, cold, and silent as a morning veil draped across the forest. Elias, Lena, and Brutus approached an abandoned cabin near the forest border, the last known location where contact had been lost with the Southern Patrol the night before. It used to serve as shelter during wildfire season. Now, only moldy wooden walls and a sagging, half-collapsed roof remained. "Careful," Elias murmured, his voice low. His hand gently rested on Brutus's head, a silent signal that spoke volumes. "You lead. I'll follow." Brutus gave a soft whine, moving toward the door. His body was wound tight like a drawn bowstring. Wind hissed through the cracked door frame, but inside there was nothing. No sound, no motion. Lena pressed an ear to the cabin wall, scanning with her rifle scope. "No movement, but something feels off." Elias nodded. They pushed the door open. The first sound, just a rusty creak of hinges. No one inside. Only a barren room, overturned chairs, a cold fireplace, and a clean swipe through the dust on the floor, as if someone had stood there for a long time and just left. Elias moved in, weapon raised. Brutus took a few steps, then froze. Ears perked. 1 heartbeat. 2. Slam! The back door exploded open. Gunfire shattered the silence. "Brutus!" Elias's scream cracked through the forest. A bullet ripped through Brutus's shoulder, throwing him to the cabin floor. The impact was heavy, so brutal it seemed to shake the forest itself. Lena spun and fired toward the rear door. A shadow darted past, fast, precise, like someone who knew every board of that cabin. Howie. Elias dropped beside Brutus. Blood poured from beneath thick fur, vivid red against aged, pale wood. But Brutus's eyes were open. He growled, not from pain, but from a refusal to go down. "No. Stay down." "Listen to me, buddy. You saved me once. Now it's my turn," Elias whispered, pressing hard against the wound. "Heading toward the ravine," Lena yelled. "Don't chase him. Call the medevac first." Elias barked, voice cracking from strain. He pulled off his belt, wrapped it tight around Brutus's shoulder, binding the embedded round. His hands trembled, but his eyes never left Brutus's, still glowing with loyalty, with a will to live. "Brutus, don't close your eyes." It wasn't a command. It was a plea, a battle-hardened soldier, a veteran ranger, a man who feared nothing, now just a friend, begging his dog not to die. Brutus gave a soft growl, barely a breath, but unmistakable. Elias laughed, tears rolling. That's right. Stubborn as ever. Outside, Lena fired a flare for the medevac. Brutus's bleeding slowed but didn't stop. He licked Elias's hand weakly, his heartbeat fading. Just hold on a little longer, buddy. You don't get to die here. Not today. Not like this, Elias said, staring into the glassy eyes growing dim. The sound of rotors thundered faintly in the distance. Lena launched a second flare. Brutus lifted his head barely when he heard it, and in that fading gaze, one thing burned steady. Faith. Faith in his partner, in his human, the one he chose to fall beside if it came to that. Elias leaned in, pressing his forehead to Brutus's. I swear, if you live, I'll end this. For you. For everything right. Brutus didn't answer. But he didn't fall. Snow blanketed the ground in heavy silence, and in that field of white, Brutus's blood streaked like a red thread slashed through despair. Elias tightened the gauze, turned to Lena, voice cracked and raw. Keep him alive. I'll bring him back. Brutus lay still, eyes open, as if saying, Go, stop him, before he hurts anyone else. Elias gave a single nod and ran. He bolted from the cabin toward the eastern ravine where Howie had vanished like a shadow. Rachel, an officer from the Rapid Response Unit, arrived minutes after Brutus was hit. Without pause, she joined Elias through forest and snow, following the tire tracks still fresh in thawing mud. He won't get far. His vehicle's not made for this terrain, Rachel said, breath fogging. Elias gritted his teeth. He doesn't need far. Just enough time for Brutus to die. Rachel glanced at him. His eyes weren't a ranger's anymore. They were a man's who'd reached his limit. Not blind rage, pure, righteous fury. Not far ahead, Howie crouched between two rocks, scanning with military binoculars. He saw Elias run, saw Brutus unmoving. He smirked. Told you, Elias, he whispered. I'm the architect. You're just rotting lumber. But he didn't see Rachel, and that was his first mistake. As he turned to retreat, Rachel dropped from above, tackled him with a perfect chokehold. Howie lunged for his blade, but Elias was already there, gun to his forehead. Don't, Elias growled. No forest to hide in this time. No laws to protect you. Howie exhaled slowly, lips curling like he still held the upper hand. You know killing me won't change anything. Elias stepped closer, eyes burning. I'm not here to change. I'm here to finish. They restrained him. Rachel cuffed and double-locked his wrists. Blood dripped from his exposed forearm, revealing a tattoo. 3 intersecting lines like an axe, the mark seen in black site files tied to the Solace network. He wasn't here by accident. He'd been sent. Who gave the order? Elias growled. Howie grinned. That dog of yours? Probably won't live long enough to hear the answer. It hit Elias like a slap. His fists clenched. Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder. Not here. Not in front of him. Elias nodded, not out of mercy, but because there was something more important. Brutus. Back at the cabin, Lena had stabilized the bleeding, but Brutus was still slipping. Each breath trembled, blood trickled again. I need blood, now, Lena snapped. His brain's losing oxygen. Elias bolted toward the ranger station. No ambulance could reach them in this storm. Only one way left. Carry Brutus. Through the woods, through the snow, to the Northern Veterinary Station, 2 hours on foot. But they didn't have hours. Not when Brutus was fading fast. Elias knelt, whispered into Brutus's ear, "You don't get to die today, buddy. Not while I'm still breathing." Brutus didn't answer, but as Elias hoisted him onto his back, the dog shifted just slightly to help. Lena's eyes welled. Rachel took point. Elias carried Brutus, arms trembling under the weight. The march began through snow, through howling wind, through a vow not yet spoken. Wind screamed like grief through the pines. Snow tried to bury them with every step. Elias's legs had gone numb long ago, but his arms never loosened their grip on Brutus. Blood still leaked, slower now, but ominous. His breathing thin, raspy. Lena staggered beside him, flashlight flickering. Rachel led, weapon ready, not to fight, but to protect every second of the life Elias carried. No one spoke, only wind, and Elias's soft chant, "You don't die. Not on me. Not today." After nearly 90 minutes, they reached the temporary veterinary post, a small clinic for rescue animals tucked in a narrow valley. A dim yellow light spilled from the eaves like hope, bleeding through a frozen world. Dr. Miriam Cole stepped outside, froze in place when she saw the bloodied German shepherd in Elias's arms. "Get a trauma table, now!" she screamed. Elias laid Brutus down, hands never leaving him. "Left shoulder, handgun, point blank. I packed the wound. Might have hit lung, maybe heart." His voice was detached, but each word clear like battlefield orders. Cole peeled back the bandages. Her jaw tightened. "We need surgery. Now. If it touched the heart, we're counting seconds." "Then count them," Elias rasped. "I'm not leaving." The operation took 43 minutes. Outside, Elias stood frozen, hand wrapped around Brutus's collar strap. Lena and Rachel waited nearby, silent. Nothing they said could touch the abyss in his eyes. Finally the doors opened. Dr. Cole emerged exhausted, but smiling faintly. "Missed the heart by 1.7 centimeters. Elias gasped, like waking from death. "Lungs nicked, but reflexes are strong. He's a fighter." Lena hugged him, holding back tears. Rachel whispered, "He did it. Brutus made it." Elias walked inside, sat beside the table, laid his hand on Brutus's head, still unconscious, but breathing steady. "I knew it. I knew you wouldn't leave me. You're a soldier, and soldiers don't fall easy." Brutus was given blood, heat, and rest in a special recovery chamber. That night Elias didn't leave. He stayed holding the collar, remembering everything, from their first day of training to the moment Brutus chose him over the pack, to that gunshot, and those eyes that never wavered. A dog that never spoke a word, yet knew Elias better than any soul alive. At dawn, Rachel returned, face grim. "Elias, we've got a problem." She laid 2 infrared images on the table, captured by a drone patrol near the cabin. 3 armed men, no more than 2 kilometers from the clinic. "They're not hunting wildlife," Rachel said. "And they were there before we arrived." Elias rose, eyes turning cold. "That means we've been watched all along." Lena gripped her sidearm. "Howie was just a shadow. Solace, or whoever's behind this, is still watching." Elias turned to Brutus now, breathing easier. His gaze softened. "Then they'll learn what they can't buy, what they can't control." He leaned down, whispered to Brutus, "We're not done yet, buddy. But I swear nothing touches you while I still stand." Brutus didn't wake, but his paw twitched just once. And in that moment, Elias knew. Even if the whole system was hunting them, even if the forest drowned in danger, he still had Brutus, and for him that was enough to fight to the end. Morning in Granite Hollow wasn't pure anymore. The sky was still blue, the wind still moved the trees, but the way sunlight filtered through the canopy no longer felt warm. Inside a temporary field office perched on the forest's edge, Elias sat before a large monitor. Electronic files flashed across the screen. Forest parcel maps, forged land deeds, anonymous invoices, and mining permits, all stamped with one name, E. Ward. "I never signed a damn one of these," Elias said, his voice as dry as dust. Federal Agent Jordan Metz nodded. "We know. But the forger was smart. They didn't just fake your signature. They built a whole system to hide it." Metz snapped his fingers. The screen changed. Satellite images, financial flowcharts, and security footage from Ranger HQ blinked into view. At the center of it all, one name pulsed like a black hole: Solace Corporation. A web spun from Beckett's surveillance office, threading through shell companies, shrinking protected land parcels to dodge oversight, routing restoration contracts into dark investment funds in Florida and South Dakota. Elias stared at the spider web. "Solace. Them again." Metz replied, "Beckett was just a gatekeeper. He had just enough authority to sign, but not enough to ask questions. He closed his eyes, signed, and got paid well." Lena, arms crossed, frowned. "So who's the one pulling the strings?" Metz flipped another file open. Inside names: a state deputy director, a real estate developer, and a former military commander who'd served in the Middle East. Each had received funds from the Redstone Environmental Research Initiative, a front group operated by Solace. "This isn't a local case anymore," Elias muttered. Rachel entered holding a traffic cam photo from the town outskirts. She tossed it on the desk. "There. The night Brutus was shot, Beckett's truck was caught in the restricted zone where he had no business being, and in the passenger seat." Elias looked closely. The photo was grainy, but the silhouette was familiar thin, broad-shouldered, head slightly tilted. Mark Howie. "They were together?" Lena asked. Rachel nodded. "I used to think Beckett was just being played, but he knew. He helped set up the attack on Elias, whether on orders or to shut him up." Metz added, "Actually, he's received nearly $200,000 over 2 years, funneled through his ex-wife's company. The name? Tara Shade. Nobody noticed until we checked the office supply invoices." The room went silent. Beckett, the man who once pinned a badge on Elias and said, "You're part of this forest now," had signed the order that nearly got him killed. Elias stepped outside. Wind roared through the pines. Brutus lay resting near the truck leg, still wrapped, but eyes sharper now. Elias sat beside him, hand resting on his head. "I kept believing there was still something decent left in Beckett, but you knew better." Brutus didn't move, but his gaze stayed fixed on the forest, the place where it all began, and where it would end. Hours later, Beckett sat across from Elias in an interrogation room. His eyes weren't fearful anymore, just the weary look of a man who realized he was no longer useful. "You know, I didn't have a choice," Beckett whispered. Elias didn't reply. He simply dropped a 200-page dossier on the table, each page a meticulous record of violations, transfers, and falsified maps. "We used to stand side by side, watched wildfires tear through this land, swore we'd protect it. And you sold it. For what? Money? Beckett gave a hollow laugh. No, because I knew. If I didn't sell, they'd burn it. If I didn't sign, they'd kill. I thought I could slow them down, maybe save part of it. Elias closed his eyes. And did you? Beckett said nothing, then lowered his head. After the interrogation room lights went dark, Elias stood alone in the hallway. Lena approached, Rachel right behind. On the monitor, a new satellite ping uploaded 3 more forest plots being silently carved up, all tied to one encrypted name, Solace. Elias turned to them. We need a new team, one with full autonomy. No more warnings, no more waiting. We move now. Lena nodded. Rachel gave a faint smile. What do we call it? Elias knelt beside Brutus, still resting, eyes closed but ears alert. Forest Echo. Brutus gave a faint whine, like the forest itself answering back from blood, from memory, from the part of them that was done waiting. Night fell on Granite Hollow like a wet blanket over a chest just recovering from trauma. No one said much after Beckett's confession. The team retreated to scattered cabins, each lost in their own thoughts. Only Elias remained. He stood inside the old command post where, 2 years ago, Beckett had handed him the ranger badge and said, "You were born to protect what others only see as dollar signs." That memory now felt like a dull blade lodged in his ribs, too blunt to kill, but deep enough to bleed. He sat, placing the badge on the table. The metal had dulled with time, but the inscription remained, United Forestry Service, honor above all. Honor, Beckett's shield for betrayal. Elias clenched his fist. For a moment it looked like he might smash the badge to the floor, but his hand relaxed, not out of forgiveness. He was simply too tired to be angry. Outside, Brutus stood shakily on bandaged legs, but he stood. As Elias stepped out, the dog raised his head, tired but unwavering. Elias sat beside him. The wind sighed through the ridge, carrying pine and last year's burn scars. He was the first to believe in me after the war, Elias whispered, when no one else would look me in the eye, reeking of gunpowder, hands shaking. Brutus tilted his head, eyes fixed on Elias. He brought me here, said the forest could heal everything. I believed him. I followed every rule, every damn promise. Elias paused. His voice cracked. And in the end, he left me bound and discarded like my life was just another asset to write off. Brutus didn't move, didn't bark. He just sat still, solid as a landmark even the wind couldn't wear down. Elias chuckled softly, eyes red but dry. All I've got left is you, and I know if you're still breathing, you won't let me fall. He reached down, touching Brutus's neck right where the bullet nearly killed him. You and I, we survived because of each other. Back inside, Lena sorted fresh reports from HQ. Rachel knocked gently, handing Elias a new file. Solace isn't stopping at land. They're buying up biological preserves too, claiming research, but it's all logging. Elias nodded, eyes locked on the flickering fire. There's no turning back now, is there? Rachel paused, then said quietly, We're not investigating anymore. We're fighting. Later that night, Elias entered the old wood cabin where Brutus rested. He sat beside him, and for the first time in years, spoke to his dog like he was his only friend left. I don't know if what we're doing will fix anything. I used to think law was an anchor. Now I see. It bends, too. Brutus breathed steadily, eyes closed, ears twitching at Elias's voice. "And you, Brutus? You're not my anchor. You're the stake in the ground, the only thing keeping me from slipping away into what I tried so hard to outrun." Elias leaned back, eyes shut. Fire crackled, wind howled. Brutus breathed. There are nights that need no prayer, only a presence that doesn't betray. And tonight, Elias was sheltered by the one thing that had never lied, a loyal gaze that never flinched. In the temporary Ranger HQ, wires still hung loose, reports still unfiled, but something unprecedented was unfolding. On the desk lay a new dossier, only 40 pages, but each one marked the beginning of something radical. Authorization to establish a tactical K-9 special unit. Codename, Forest Echo. Commanding Officer, Elias Ward. Next to it, personnel files, former combat rangers, surveillance techs, 2 specialized vets trained in trauma rehab for working dogs, all hand-picked, triple-screened, no compromises. "No one here's easy to manipulate," Lena said, "just like you asked." Elias nodded, eyes scanning the list. He said nothing, but inside something returned. Not fear, not bitterness, leadership. No longer the man abandoned in the snow, no longer a dream chained in the woods. He was walking forward, and this time they were walking with him. In the recovery bay, Brutus's bandages came off. The vet checked the incision, tapped his shoulder. "Good. Muscles strong, reflexes intact, no nerve damage." Brutus stood limping, but every step firm, as if relearning from scratch. Elias approached. He said nothing, just held out a new K-9 tag. Echo, 01. Brutus looked at him for a moment, then lowered his head, letting Elias place it on his collar. The unit's inauguration was quiet. No cameras, no press, just a steel plaque in front of the main cabin. Forest Echo, Tactical K-9 Response Unit. We don't just patrol, we protect what's right. No flowers, no speeches, only Elias, standing before a new team, veterans, rookies, fighters, none of them bought. Brutus at his side, silent, regal. Elias stepped forward, voice calm but resolute. "No one here was born to be a hero, but we have the right not to stay silent." That night, after the team dispersed to prepare for first drills at dawn, Elias sat by the fire. Brutus lay beside him, head on his lap. The firelight reflected on his new badge, not a Ranger 1. It read, Echo, Tactical K-9 Supervisor, etched by hand on the back. For the ones who bark when others stay silent. Once again, Elias placed a hand on Brutus's fur. His palm was cold from the wind, but that warmth beneath it, that was enough. "We're not the ones left behind anymore," he whispered. Maybe he was speaking to Brutus, maybe to the part of himself buried in frost years ago. Brutus exhaled a deep, long breath, like he was letting go of every winter that came before. Every locked cage, every dead stare, every shot unacknowledged. What remained was one final mission, not vengeance, not glory, but to protect what's right. Even if it was as fragile as first snowfall, once it landed, it left a mark. Elias stood slowly, like a man rebuilding from the ruins. Lena watched from a distance, saying nothing. But she knew. After tonight, Elias was no longer just a survivor. He was someone who chose to rise. Brutus followed, no command needed. Each step a vow. I don't quit. I don't abandon, and I never leave the one I chose. They walked past the bullet-scarred walls. Wind slipped through the doors, carrying whispers of leaves brushing, branches breaking, of a forest that knew all secrets men tried to bury. At the threshold, Elias stopped, Brutus beside him, staring into the dark. "This is the beginning," Elias said. No reply. Only Lena's faint flashlight beam marking a path into the night. And amid all that was uncertain, one thing remained. Man and dog chose to stay. Not heroes, not martyrs. Just two souls, once discarded by war, betrayal, and broken promises, who found each other, not to heal the past, but to write a better ending. The wind blew again, gentler this time, and in Brutus's steady breath, Elias heard the only thing he needed to believe. It wasn't over, and they were still here to finish it right. The rain came down cold, relentless, as if the sky had split open, and each drop carried the weight of a memory no one dared to name. In the holding room beneath Echo Station, a flickering yellow bulb hung from the ceiling. It didn't flicker because of faulty wiring. No, the security system had been deliberately cut off from the central network. Elias didn't want a single byte of data leaking, not now. Howie was bound to a metal chair. Dried blood crusted around his collar. The shallow wound on his face from the takedown hadn't been treated yet. But his eyes, still smug. Elias stood before him, saying nothing. Only Brutus's footsteps echoed slow, deliberate, a silent patrol without command. Each time he passed Howie, he stopped and stared. No growl, no bark, just stared. Howie began to lose patience. "How long do you think you can keep me here?" Elias said nothing. Rachel placed a photo in front of him, taken from the USB found in Howie's cabin. It was a map of forest ownership zones and coded markers, forged names, and one overarching objective: statewide forestry control, 2030. Elias pointed to the lower right corner, a small symbol identical to the tattoo on Howie's wrist. Below it, handwritten in red ink, Solace. For the first time, Howie's expression shifted. Elias didn't break eye contact. "Who is Solace?" Howie laughed, a jagged rusted knife laugh. "I'm not allowed to know. I only heard the voice." "Where?" "Encrypted device. Played before each meeting. No face, no records, no fingerprints." Rachel leaned in. "Then why follow him? If you didn't know who he was, why obey?" Howie shrugged. "Because he's the only one who never needed to convince us. Solace doesn't persuade. He commands." Elias's voice tightened. "And he commanded you to shoot a dog?" Howie glanced at Brutus now, standing right behind him. No bared teeth, no threat. Just those eyes that had lived through war, fire, and betrayal. Howie swallowed hard. Solace didn't want the forest destroyed. He wanted it controlled. Every move was planned, from inserting me into the force to setting up Beckett to Elias. Even letting you live was calculated. The last sentence froze the air in the room. Elias went still. "He knew about me?" Howie nodded. "You were tracked after Honduras. You were a risk, but also a test subject. If you fell, Solace would know who else to cut." Lena entered, holding a printed transcript, eyes sharp with urgency. "We traced audio files from the USB. Got a voice recording. No visual, but the voice. It's not some middle-tier operative. She tapped the speaker. A voice echoed low, cold, cavernous. Any threat to ownership structure must be eliminated. Dog or badge, it doesn't matter. Brutus raised his head. Elias closed his eyes and lowered his chin. No more doubt. Solace knew. Solace watched. Solace gave orders. And now Solace knew Echo had struck back. That night, Elias did something he hadn't done since 2014. He wrote a report by hand, each letter deliberate, sharp. Subject, Solace. Location, unknown threat level, systemic note. Cannot be dismantled by conventional law, requires action beyond legal perimeter. He set the pen down. Brutus lay by the window, staring into the forest, dark, silent. We've begun, buddy, but this time, it's not patrol. Brutus didn't turn, just gently swept his tail across the wooden floor. A quiet sweep, but it was all the answer Elias needed. Granite Hollow didn't sleep that night. The forest, blanketed in fog and branches arched like ribs, felt like it was holding its breath, bracing for something that refused to stay hidden. Inside Echo HQ's data room, Lena and Rachel studied footage extracted from Howie's hidden cabin cam. One frame, partially obscured, showed a wrist tattoo beneath a half-rolled glove. Lena zoomed in, adjusted the contrast. A symbol emerged. A bleeding eye within a triangle, 3 slashes beneath. Elias walked in and stopped dead. That, he said softly. I saw that. Columbia, 2011. Rachel turned. You're sure? Elias nodded. It's not a military tattoo. Not gang, either. That's a Black Ridge mark, a division of a private military group that was disbanded after illegal operations in the Middle East and South America. Lena frowned. Black Ridge? I thought Congress dissolved them after the hearings. Elias smirked. They vanished. On paper. He pointed at the 3 slashes. Internally, it meant 3 off-book operations completed. Only elite assassins wore that. Rachel ran a search. The system returned. No official records. Elias whispered, if they're still active, Solace isn't just a local player. He has international ties. Brutus stepped in, drawn by the tension. He stopped before the screen, tilting his head eyes, glinting like he could sense a ghost's heartbeat. The next morning, Echo launched a silent sweep on a remote cabin deep in Granite's west, flagged by thermal cams for irregular nocturnal activity. Elias, Brutus, Lena, and a young agent named Caleb led the approach. The cabin was empty, but inside, on a rotting wooden table, an old map of the forest, annotated not with trails, but military codes. Behind the door, a rusted U.S. Army supply crate, its QR code scraped off. Rachel later checked the crate. Not in any official supply chain. Elias flipped the box over. At the bottom, scrawled in charcoal, a crude drawing of the same eye. But this time, with one handwritten message, S-23. Reclamation begins here. Brutus gave a soft bark. Not a warning. A memory. Back at Echo, Elias stared at the expanding file. One tattoo, one message. One military crate left behind like an omen. Lena spoke behind him, voice low. If this is Black Ridge's remnants, then this isn't just a state issue anymore. Elias turned. You think someone from the shadow government's backing Solace? Lena shook her head. I think Solace was part of them. And now he's using the leftovers to build a new empire of forests, of land, of all places the law can't reach. Brutus remained still, but his gaze stayed fixed on the window where the wind carried pine, snow, and something else only a dog could smell. Old blood, still warm. That evening, Elias wrote the first line of Echo's internal combat journal. We are not facing a network. We are facing an ideology revived under the mask of law. If we fail, Echo will disappear, like every unit that dared speak the truth. He closed the notebook. Brutus lay at his feet, awake. Because this dream wasn't for the faint-hearted. Granite Hollow drowned beneath thick, snow-white, silent, suffocating. In Echo's tactical room, no one spoke. Flashlights swept across the wall-mounted map where Lena pieced together threads. Forged papers, Black Ridge symbols, Solace's voice, unregistered crates, and the phrase, "Reclamation begins here." Elias leaned against the fogged glass. The air felt like a sealed indictment. Rachel dropped a folder on the table. FBI refuses escalation, says there's not enough to federalize the case. Lena clenched her jaw. The cam footage? Forged maps? The tattoo? Rachel shook her head. Still not enough to override local jurisdiction. She looked at Elias. Which means, if we want to go further... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Brutus sat by the table. His eyes moved from face to face as if listening not to words, but to doubt, to resolve, to hesitation. Elias stepped outside. Snow slapped against his jacket. He tilted his face upward, letting the cold bite into his skin. Lena followed shortly after. Elias. He opened his eyes. I used to think that if you did everything right, inside the law, justice would follow. And now I see. Some names live above the law, and they write the rules. Silence. Do you believe me? Elias asked. Always. The wind screamed. He turned toward the woods. I want to go to Solace. Direct. No reports, no permissions, just us. Lena hesitated. If we're caught? I don't care about reputation anymore. What I care about, if we wait, someone else will be chained to a tree in winter like I was. And next time, they won't survive. Brutus let out a low growl. Not angry, certain. That night in Echo's eastern outpost, Elias called in the elite team. On the table, a red-marked map. The coordinates led to a land parcel never listed in any public record, but granted under a shell company's name. Deep forest. No satellite coverage. The only place to build something underground unnoticed. We infiltrate at dawn, Elias said. No reports. No permissions. If we're caught, this unit doesn't exist, but if we succeed, we get names, locations, and evidence. Lena glanced at the faces around the room. No one backed out. Brutus stepped beside Elias. He crouched, placed a hand on his head. This time, buddy. There's no one backing us, but there's no one holding us back either. Just before leaving the cabin, Elias looked back at the room once a legal outpost, now a war room. He closed the Echo journal softly, letting the weight of those words settle in the silence. The ink hadn't even dried, but the message had already carved itself into the walls of the cabin, and deeper still, into the marrow of who Elias Ward had become. Outside, the wind whistled low between the pine trees. Snow flurried, light now, a soft contrast to the violent storm that had passed days earlier, the one that had nearly buried him alive, the one that had brought Brutus back into his life. The fire crackled gently behind him. Brutus lay by the hearth, one paw twitching in sleep, ears still alert despite the calm. There was no true rest for a soldier. Not for the man, not for the dog. But there were moments like this, moments where the war paused long enough for breath. Elias stood and walked toward the small window overlooking the tree line. Darkness loomed out there, quiet and waiting. Somewhere in those woods, Solace's men still watched. Somewhere, more lies waited to be uncovered. But for now, here was truth. He ran his fingers along the old wooden frame, the same cabin wall that once held bullet holes, patched now, but never forgotten. That's the thing about scars, he thought. They didn't disappear. They taught you where never to stand still again. Behind him, Brutus stirred, not from threat, from instinct. Elias turned back. Their eyes met. "You felt it too, didn't you?" Elias asked softly. Brutus didn't move, but his gaze remained steady, that unflinching German shepherd calm that never lied. Elias had learned something important from that gaze. When you couldn't speak, the truth had to live in your eyes. Brutus carried truths men were too afraid to write down. Echo wasn't just a journal. It was now the name of their unit. It was now a vow. He opened the cabinet beside the fireplace. Inside lay a black box. Simple. Locked. Not by password, but by promise. Within it, files, classified, redacted, and some dangerously close to vanishing altogether. Land deeds forged. Communications rerouted. Paper trails buried beneath layers of legal misdirection. But Elias had seen them, all of them. And the system that once left him to die in the cold now had a reckoning coming, not from rage, but from resolve. He strapped his gear back on, the vest tight but familiar. Each strap a reminder of the weight he chose to carry again, not out of obligation, out of purpose. Lena appeared at the door. She didn't knock. She didn't need to. Brutus sat up when he saw her, tail thumping once, then still. "We just got word," she said. "Transmission intercepted. Northern Ridge." Encrypted, but familiar tones. Solace's voice. "He's moving something. Or someone." Elias gave a faint nod. "Then we're not done." "No," she replied. "We're just beginning." He turned back to Brutus. "You ready, old boy?" The dog moved before the sentence finished. No hesitation, no drama. Just that silent, powerful certainty that came from surviving hell and choosing to walk back into it, not because someone asked, but because it was right. They stepped out into the snow together, Lena, Elias, and Brutus. The first of many to carry the name Echo, not as a code name, but as a declaration that justice doesn't disappear, it echoes. And in a world where shadows grew thick and men like Solace thought they owned the silence, it was time someone reminded them there is always someone listening, and now someone answering back. Snow fell thick and fast, blanketing the northern edge of Granite Hollow in a shroud of eerie silence. The Echo K9 team, Elias, Lena, Rachel, Caleb, and Brutus, moved deep into the zone marked as abandoned in official records, yet satellite thermal scans showed heat signatures. The old compound sat wedged between two towering cliffs, a cold slab of concrete, windowless, lifeless, but somehow still breathing. No crows, no wind. Only Brutus's eyes sweeping every corner, as if he sensed something fundamentally wrong. "Looks deserted," Caleb whispered, lowering his weapon. "Too quiet," Rachel murmured. Watch for thermal mines." Elias didn't respond. His grip on Brutus's leash tightened, not to restrain, but to signal, "Ready." Brutus froze at the rear door, ears up, eyes squinting. A split second later, he growled low and darted backward. "Above!" Lena shouted. Boom! The ground shuddered. A directional mine exploded less than 10 yards away. The team was thrown off their feet, snow flying like shards of white glass. Gunfire erupted from both sides of the cliffs, an ambush, hidden in snow-camouflaged ledges. "Ambush!" Elias shouted, rolling behind a shattered wall. "Formation B! Shields up! Where's Brutus?" No one could answer. Brutus had vanished. In the blinding snow, Brutus ran in a wide arc, guided not by command, not by reflex, but by the raw instinct of survival. He dove into a frozen thicket, his paws silent. He knew from scent, from the faint metallic clink beneath the earth, there was a tunnel. Something moved beneath. Brutus scraped at the ice. A steel grate just wide enough for a human. Below, a narrow shaft leading away from the kill zone. He looked up the cliffside and barked 3 times. Short, sharp, urgent. Amid the gunfire, Elias rolled beside Lena. "Did you hear that?" 3 barks. Brutus found a way. "Fall back that direction, move." The team peeled away from their compromised positions, ducking behind crumbling walls. Caleb tossed a smoke grenade. Rachel provided cover fire as she dragged the med kit. All followed Brutus's signal. The ravine was slick and narrow, but beneath it, a way out, just as Brutus had led. The tunnel, barely crawlable, descended to a frozen underground stream behind the cliff face. Brutus stood waiting, eyes fixed on the ridge above. As soon as Caleb, the last one, slid in, Brutus turned, gave a quiet huff, and followed. Seconds later, the cliff collapsed behind them. A series of directional charges leveled the old compound. Had Brutus been 10 seconds later, they'd all be buried beneath the snow. They crawled out through an old drainage duct, faces bruised, coats torn, hands purple from cold, but all accounted for. Brutus emerged last. He turned, looked back, not for survivors, for watchers. Elias dropped to one knee, hand resting on Brutus's head. His fingers trembled, not from cold, but from the realization. They'd been saved, not by tactics, but by faith in the instinct of a soul that needed no badge to know what was right. From the audio device in Lena's backpack, somehow undamaged, came one final recording. Echo escaped, but they know now. Proceed to Phase 3, and remember, eliminate the dog first. Brutus stared directly at the speaker as if he understood every word. That night, their Echo hideout cabin sat in stillness. Outside, the forest lay draped in white like a burial shroud. Inside, the fire crackled faintly against the walls. Elias sat alone, back against the gun locker, hands stained with blood, not his. Brutus lay nearby, head on crossed paws, eyes shut, but not asleep. Occasionally, his muscles twitched as if dreaming or remembering. Elias watched him. He'd seen those eyes before, in army hospitals. In the faces of soldiers pulled from fire zones, no one expected them to survive. Those eyes weren't a dog's. They were the eyes of a soldier. Brutus opened them, and the memories came, not in words, but in smells, sounds, sensations. Helicopter blades slicing desert wind, bullets peppering sand, voices screaming in foreign tongues. In that scorched wasteland, Brutus had been young, trained not to rescue, but to obey kill. His handler never called him Brutus, only Delta 7. To him, Brutus wasn't alive, just a living weapon. He remembered the stench of scorched blood from a bayonet, the scream of Private Clarkson, his first partner falling in the Kandahar ambush. Brutus had pawed at his chest, trying to wake him. He didn't understand death. He only understood, "Don't lie still. Get up. We need to run home." But Clarkson never moved. And after that, Brutus was no longer treated as a partner, only as a tool and punishment. When the base was overrun, Brutus was left behind. Shrapnel lodged in his hind leg. He crawled 3 days through sand, no food, no water. They found him barely alive, skin over bone, eyes wide open, staring as if to ask, "Why come back now?" No one wanted to keep him. Some pushed for euthanasia, but a senior agent made the call. New name, Brutus. No more Delta 7, no more kill commands, just instinct and memories that never fade. Brutus stared at the fire. Elias sat beside him, removing the bandage on his leg. He cleaned the dried blood, applied ointment, looked up. Their eyes met. No words were needed. Elias exhaled. "You're not a service dog, you're a warrior, and maybe the last survivor of a war they wanted erased." Brutus rested his head on Elias's lap. Quiet, as if after all this time someone finally understood. No command, no justification, just recognition. Outside, the wind stirred. Elias tapped the map. The voice in that recording said to eliminate Echo. They're not just targeting us, they want to erase what Echo stands for. Brutus growled quietly, not in fear, in remembrance. And this time, he wouldn't let it happen again. Back in Echo's underground ops room, Lena plugged in the USB. No one spoke. Rachel peeled off her gloves, eyes locked on the screen. Caleb locked the door from the inside, hand on his sidearm, not to fight, but to be ready for what came next. Elias stood beside Brutus, hand resting gently on his head as if grounding himself through the only soul still steady. Lena hit play. The sound hissed at first, then cleared. A man's voice, low, calm, cold as steel. Confirmed. Echo Team has withdrawn from Zone 14. Proceed to Phase 3. Purge all data, personnel, and infrastructure. Emphasize, Echo must be wiped out completely. The audio cut. No one breathed. Lena blinked. "That's him," she rasped. "Solace." Elias staggered back as if the air had vanished. He dropped into a chair, head low. The voice still echoed in his skull, each word a nail driven deep. Wipe out, completely. This wasn't an investigation anymore, not a pursuit. They were the target. Rachel clenched her fist. "They're not just killing people, they're killing belief." Caleb growled, "We know too much. We're witnesses." Elias looked at Brutus. The dog never looked away from the screen as if he understood it all. In the silence that followed, Brutus's eyes, steady, deep, like tempered steel, were the only thing keeping Elias from falling apart. He stood, his voice low, but solid as stone. Solace doesn't fear us. He fears what Echo represents, loyalty that can't be bought, truth that can't be buried, and life that refuses to obey. He walked to the armory. "Then it's time we answered." He looked at Brutus, then Lena, Rachel, Caleb. "With everything we've got, and with the one thing they can never manufacture, a soul that cannot be programmed." Brutus growled softly, then nodded, as if he was the one giving the order. That night, the sky over Granite Hollow was ink black. But in the shadows, The quiet preparations of Echo K9 loading weapons, securing armor, plotting coordinates showed they were no longer guardians of the forest. They were carriers of truth stepping into the filthiest corners of lies. They weren't answering a voice. They were preparing for the final battle. The kind you don't come back from the same. The kind that strips you bare, exposes what you believe in when no one's watching, when no backup's coming, and when every choice carries weight heavier than bullets. The snow beneath their boots crunched with purpose as the Echo team moved out. No war cries, no glory, just precision, just conviction. At the front was Elias, jaw clenched, eyes cold but clear. Brutus trotted beside him, not leashed, never leashed, but matched to every step, like a shadow that had chosen not just to follow, but to fight. Behind them, Lena loaded the last shell into her sidearm. She checked over her shoulder. The tree line was still, but they all knew that meant nothing now. Stillness was a mask, and solace had worn too many of those. "This ridge," she said, nodding toward the slope ahead, "is where the comms traced last movement." "If he's running, he's leaving a trail." Elias didn't reply. He didn't need to. Some things weren't spoken aloud. They were understood, like the way Brutus's hackles rose just a little as they passed the old ranger tower burned out a month ago. Like the way Lena's pace changed, slower, tighter, hand resting on her hip holster now. They weren't heading toward a target. They were walking into a truth no one wanted to face. A truth built on betrayal, covered in government stamps and soaked in the blood of the forgotten. And yet, Echo walked on. Brutus veered slightly, nose low, ears twitching. His body shifted, focused, taut. Then he froze. Elias raised a fist. Everyone stopped. For a beat, silence blanketed the world. Then, a low, almost imperceptible growl from Brutus's throat. Elias followed his line of sight. Up ahead, half hidden behind a wall of pine and mist, was an outpost, camouflaged expertly, but not perfectly. The glint of metal, just a sliver, betrayed its presence. "Tripwires there," Lena murmured, pointing subtly toward a fallen log where frost had melted faster than it should have. Elias nodded. "2 snipers," he added. "One above, one to the west." Brutus didn't move, but Elias saw the subtle flick of his tail, a signal they'd practiced in silence, a language only shared between 2 survivors of too many ambushes. They split. Lena circled left. Elias drew right. Brutus vanished into the tree line like smoke, low and fast. No bark, no snap of twigs, just intent. Seconds stretched. Then chaos. The crack of suppressed gunfire, a sharp yelp, followed by a thud. And then the roar of Brutus tearing through snow and brush as he brought down one of the masked guards in a blur of fang and fury. Elias surged forward, weapon ready, voice calm even in the chaos. "Echo! Lock in!" Within 60 seconds, it was over. Bodies down. Compound breached. Silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful. Inside, they found maps, coordinates, payment logs, and the one thing that mattered most, a hard drive labeled with a single word, Continuum. Elias held it in his gloved hand. Cold, heavy, more dangerous than any weapon they'd brought in. "This," Lena said, breath visible in the frozen air, "is proof they never planned to stop." Elias looked down at Brutus, who now sat beside one of the fallen, not snarling, not gloating, just watching, guarding, as if to say, "I saw the end of what they started. Now I see its end." Elias slipped the drive into his vest pocket and whispered, more to himself than anyone else, "Then we finish it. All of it." Not because they had orders, not because they would be remembered, but because no one else would, and because somewhere deep in that forest, under ice, under blood, under lies, was something still worth protecting. The kind of thing Brutus never forgot. The kind of thing Elias was willing to give everything for. Not land, not medals, not vengeance, but a world where right still meant something, and where a man and a dog could still stand between the dark and those too fragile to fight it. The sky over Granite Hollow that day held no stars, only wind-razor-sharp wind, slicing through the bare treetops like the dying cries of a forest awaiting judgment. Echo team stood at the mouth of the ravine, the spot where the GPS signal faded, where official maps marked nothing but frozen stone and dead earth. But beneath it, buried deep in Rockley Solis's lair, there was no more denying it, no way back. Elias tightened the strap on his tactical vest. Blood still seeped from his shoulder wound from the skirmish at Zone 14. It wasn't lethal, but it was a reminder. Every step from now on could be the last. Brutus approached. Elias knelt, pressing his forehead to the shepherd's. "If anyone deserves to walk away from today, it's you." Brutus didn't scratch, whine, or respond like any ordinary dog. He only stared back, dark eyes of a warrior who had already walked through fire, and nodded slightly. No command needed, no leash required. He moved for what was right. Rachel checked her signal transmitter. Lena adjusted the thermal lens. Caleb fastened a heat-reactive tracker to his wall scanner. No one spoke. No good luck wishes. Only Brutus leading. He sniffed, then veered left, guiding them into a moss-covered rock tunnel barely tall enough to crawl through. The wind stopped there. Silence fell so thick they could hear each other's heartbeat. Elias crawled behind, drenched in sweat despite sub-zero temperatures. In the dark, he saw one thing. Brutus inching forward, stopping just in time, then continuing, perfectly calibrated, pure instinct, no hesitation, no fear, as if he'd walked this death path before. Then light appeared, a facility buried deep underground, no signage, no emergency exits, concrete walls, barbed wire, cameras rotating in all directions, and guards' black uniforms, no insignia. Rachel whispered, "Private military. This isn't government. This is corporate war." Elias looked at Brutus. "Can we get in?" A low growl, one sound, affirmative. Then Brutus surged forward, not like a charging dog, but like a living arrow. No bark, only speed, precision, and silent takedowns. One guard dropped, neck locked. Another raised a weapon too slow. Caleb shot him down. Echo team moved as one. Only once Elias stumbled. He fell, breath knocked out. A soldier jumped from an alcove, gun aimed straight at his chest. But Brutus leapt not at the enemy, but at Elias. He slammed Elias out of the bullet's path, then twisted his body to absorb the shot. Both crashed to the ground. Cold earth. But they lived, and living was enough. Elias gasped, turning his head. Brutus still stood bleeding, but upright, eyes blazing like fire in the dead of night. Not because of pain, but because he knew this fight was never just humanity's. When they reached the central door, Solis had not yet appeared, but no one believed this was the end, just the beginning of the final chapter. Elias placed a hand on Brutus's shoulder. "If this is our last day, then we'll end it the way we lived together, unbending, unbought. Brutus didn't bark. He simply stepped forward again, leading them through the final door, where light ended and truth began. The final door opened not by force, but by the fingerprint of a man long dead. Rachel froze as the scanner verified Beckett's biometrics, even though his body had been under Granite Hollow's ice for 3 weeks. "They kept the corpse for access," she whispered, grip tightening on her rifle. The control room emerged dim, bare, lit only by cold fluorescent light from the concrete ceiling. No guards, no defense turrets, only one man stood there. Black suit, high collar, salt and pepper hair slicked back, expressionless, unflinching. Solace. Elias stepped forward, not a word. He didn't need one. Brutus stood at his right like a living pillar. Solace looked at them like lab specimens escaped from protocol. Then he smiled. "I've been expecting you. Not out of fear, out of curiosity, to see if loyalty can actually survive." No one replied. Lena aimed her gun. Rachel readied the code disruptor. Elias stayed silent. Solace stepped closer. "I bought the system. I trained men into hollow shells. I reprogrammed loyalty. I taught the weak to kneel, but—" His gaze locked onto Brutus. "That thing is a glitch." Brutus didn't growl, didn't bark. He only stared without hatred, only the essence of a soul that would never yield. Solace pointed at him. His hand was steady, but his voice cracked. "That's not a dog. That's freedom. And freedom is the one thing I could never control." Elias stepped up. "So, you chose to destroy it." Solace smiled, drawing a pistol from a hidden panel. "I didn't destroy it out of fear. I destroyed it because if it lives, then everything I built is a lie." He raised the gun. But before he could fire, a deep growl sounded, not of anger, but of declaration. Brutus launched, not to bite, not to kill, but to shield Elias. A shot rang out. Bodies collided. Chaos exploded. Rachel returned fire. Lena disabled the security system. Caleb breached a side exit. Elias dropped to his knees, cradling Brutus, gasping. Shoulder grazed again. Solace lay still, Rachel's bullet in his chest. He didn't scream, but his eyes stared wide open, as if even in death he couldn't fathom how he lost to a dog. Lena collapsed onto the floor. Caleb helped Rachel remove the electromagnetic locks. Elias gripped Brutus tight. "We are not tools," he whispered. "We are what they could never comprehend. The freedom to choose what's right." Brutus whimpered low, but alive. And because he lived, hope lived too. Why did a team of dogs turn into the forest against all logic, against their root home? The sun finally rose over Granite Hollow, thin, pale gold, but the first real light after countless black nights. Solace's underground complex had been neutralized. Files, hardware, and names from the network were seized, encrypted, and sent to Federal Command. No more hiding in shadows. But light never comes without a price. Elias knelt beside Brutus. For the second time in months, he saw this dog lying in blood. But this time was different. He was still breathing. Brutus was still fighting, not with fangs, but with a heartbeat. Lena steadied herself as she tended to the wound. Rachel kept Brutus conscious. Caleb stood guard at the door like a wall. "You're not going anywhere," Elias whispered, gripping Brutus's neck. "Not when things are finally starting to matter." Brutus exhaled weak, but clear. That gaze the same unyielding stare. 1 week later. Echo teams stood before the press at the State Ranger headquarters. Reporters packed the room. Cameras, mics, floods of questions. But silence fell as Elias stepped to the podium. He wore his ranger's jacket, no medals. At his side, Brutus, limping on a bandaged leg but eyes sharp. Elias looked straight into the lens. "We didn't protect land. We protected what was right." No applause. Only silence from those just now waking up. 1 month later. Brutus stood on the familiar ridge where the canine training path began. Wind swept through his dark fur. The scar remained, but Brutus didn't bow. Beside him stood Elias, with a light pack and a gaze no longer pained, just calm after the storm. Rachel, Lena, and new canine trainees stood below where a new plaque had been embedded deep into the earth. Forest Echo Canine Unit, built on trust, standing for what's right. No one in Echo knew what lay ahead, but they knew one thing. As long as people chose to stand together and had a creature by their side who would never betray them, right still had a chance. Brutus turned to Elias. No bark, no movement, just a look enough to say, "We're not done, but we're not alone." Above Granite Hollow, the forest leaves swayed gently, as if whispering of a story where man, dog, and wilderness not only survived, but together they redefined what loyalty truly means. The story of Brutus, the German shepherd, is not merely a tale of survival, but an epic of loyalty, sacrifice, and an instinct to protect what's right. Without words, without orders, Brutus chose to stand by humans, not because he was trained to, but because his heart could sense justice. In a world driven by calculation, where wrong can be bought with money and power, dogs still preserve their purest nature, unconditional loyalty. Elias survived because of Brutus, but more profoundly, it was the humanity within him that was reawakened by the gaze of a creature incapable of betrayal. Dogs don't need to be heroes to be loved, but if we love them the right way, perhaps they'll be the ones to save the last piece of human goodness left in us. Cherish animals. Be a little kinder each day. Because sometimes what's right comes from a wagging tail deep in the woods when no one expects it most.